I want to start this episode with a question. Do you have any boundary bullies in your life? Do you have any people where you feel like they regularly trample on your boundaries or they're intrusive in some way? If you're nodding your head yes, then this episode of The Terri Cole Show is for you. And if you don't know me, my name is Terri Cole, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist, a relationship expert, and I'm the author of a book called Boundary Boss, The Essential Guide to Talk True, Be Seen, and Finally Live Free, that is coming out April 20th. Woohoo! I'm super excited. I can't wait for you to have it in your hot little hands. But before we get started, I want to make sure that you are subscribed to this channel. Are you? Go check. All you got to do is hit the little bell so that every time I do something new and exciting, you will get a little notification that I did. So, want you to subscribe because you're already here, aren't you? All right, let's talk about difficult people, shall we? I think we shall. Difficult people are people who it doesn't seem to matter how you interact with them or respond to them. There's always a problem. No matter how much you give, it's like you didn't give the right amount, the right thing, or they want you to give more. So if we're looking at these people from the perspective of boundaries, we might call them boundary bullies. We might call them, in the book, I call them repeat offenders or boundary destroyers, depending on how extreme their behavior is. But let's really focus on you. In this episode, I just want to focus on you. What can you do? And let's start with raising awareness, because that's always the beginning of anything changing. So why is it hard? That is the beginning. Why is it hard for you? It may be difficult for you to draw boundaries with everyone and then bring into the mix difficult or toxic people. And now that is 3 times as hard because a lot of times those people are emotional predators as well. So they know exactly how to push your buttons. They know exactly what to say. And I'm not saying they're all emotional predators. I'm just saying it is a particular skill set to draw boundaries with difficult people. For many of us, if you are really conflict averse, like you do not like confrontation at all, people like this who are difficult know that, and they use it somewhere to their advantage to get what they want because they think you probably won't confront them. So I'm not talking about learning how to quote unquote confront people. I'm talking about learning how to draw boundaries. But before you can do that, let's look at the background. This could be particularly difficult for you if you grew up in a family system that had some boundary bullies in it, or a chaotic family system, or an abusive family system. So think about this. Was there any one person in your family growing up that everyone else sort of organized around? Everyone was a little bit afraid of them. It could be a designated patient situation, like someone who has an addiction issue, and then the family organizes around that. It could be the person, the black, we call it like the black sheep of the family that acts out. Most of the time they're acting out the veiled feelings of the group, but they are acting out. So someone who was explosive, that can make it really difficult. If you had that in your childhood, to be able to draw boundaries with difficult or explosive people when you're grown up, because the kid in you is still afraid. So that's one question is to think about is if it's familiar to you in some way, and then really think about what did you learn about asserting yourself, right? What is drawing boundaries, right? It is sharing your preferences, your desires, your deal breakers with the people in your life. It is letting the people in your life know what's okay with you and what's not okay with you. That's like based down to its simplest base form. That is what boundaries are. So obviously to do it, it really means you have to communicate. You have to be able to talk about it. Before you can talk about it, you've got to know what it is. So we understand why it's difficult. If you looked at your background or you go, oh, and some people are just very sensitive, like highly sensitive folks and empaths. You might naturally avoid difficult people if you know it's going to translate to conflict, because it might be too much for your system, right? It's a lot. When you're a highly sensitive person, I know from whence I speak because I am one, that what would affect me in my life, especially long before I learned how to really protect my energy, I would be impacted for days, weeks, months sometimes from an interaction that maybe that person, if they're always in conflict, never thought about again. But like I couldn't stop thinking about it. So that also, being a highly sensitive person can also impact your ability to want to interact with or draw boundaries with difficult or toxic personality types, which completely makes sense. So we understand why it's difficult. And in the book the Boundary Boss book that I wrote for you, we actually do a complete boundary blueprint. So in more detail, I just gave you a couple of questions for you to get an idea, but it's actually a pretty involved situation for you to actually understand why you relate to boundaries the way you do now. It really requires us to reveal your downloaded boundary blueprint, which is basically in your unconscious mind. And it's the way that you relate to boundaries. It's what you learned growing up from your family of origin, from the culture, from the country, from your friends. I mean, we're so influenced. Gender roles, all of those things impact what we think is okay and not okay for us, and our ability to express and share that, because it has so much to do with what other people think. We should be easy, right? Many women, I've said this before and I'll say it again, we've been raised to be self-abandoning codependents. We were raised and praised for being that. So it makes sense that drawing boundaries with anyone can be difficult, but much more challenging with a toxic, difficult, or explosive personality for sure. So now right now, this is going to be like a back to you. I want you to think right now in this moment, who are the most difficult people in your life? When you think about the relationships that drain you, when you think about the relationships that sometimes make you feel dread, like if you know you have to interact with the person, or if you know they want something from you, but you don't want to do it, whatever the thing is, that feeling of constriction that you might get right in the middle of your chest? Those are the people that I'm talking about. So bring to mind who they are, and then think about why. What is it about interacting with that person? Is it that you feel like you can't speak up? Is it that they're quick to anger? Is it that they remind you of someone from your childhood who was intimidating to you? I mean, these are all real reasons that a relationship can be incredibly stressful. Because awareness is your first step to changing anything. So we just bring these people to mind. You don't have to do anything right now. But there's something about knowing who the biggest offenders are. It gives you a place to start. I mean, really think about that. This is your place to start, is what is the issue? Because so much of the time we'll have a repeated issue. So it'll be with the same person. We'll have a similar conflict. I used to have a friend, and actually we're no longer friends. And the conflict was always that no matter how much time I spent with her, she was constantly saying, I miss you. It's been so long. I really feel like I just need a dose of Terri. And I was like, hello. I just spent time with you. And I find in the beginning, I was like, oh, that's sweet. But then it wasn't sweet. It felt like a form of manipulation. And when I finally drew a boundary, it took a little while, and said, hey, when you say that, it really makes me feel like what I'm doing as a friend isn't enough. Like I'm not doing enough. If I just spent time with you and you say you miss me and that we need to spend time together. And the friendship actually eventually ended because it was like she did not like that boundary. And I stopped wanting to spend time with her. After every time I spent time with her, it wasn't enough, So sometimes what gets revealed, the point of that story, is that what gets revealed when you draw the boundary is what the other people in your life are willing and or capable of doing. Because we're not always talking about people who are fully capable of changing. And then we have to look at your limiting beliefs about drawing boundaries with difficult people. It's possible for you to do this with kindness, calmly, and even if they're not calm, you can stay calm. You can end the conversation if it gets too heated, right? You're allowed to say what it is that you'd like to say. So let's say, example, I had someone in my group tell me a story about someone who continued to try to wear down their no. So she'd said to this person, it was her partner at the time, no, I don't want to do that. They would continue to come back. Oh, come on, Bev, think about it. Just think about it. Just, you know what, let's try it. Let's do, like, actually having no respect for her no, until she would get so mad, it would blow up into a huge brawl. And then he would flip the script on her and be like, I cannot believe what a psycho you are. So I had said to her, they ended up breaking up, but I had said to her in the next relationship, anytime someone is trying to, or comes back and tries to wear down your no, we know this is a boundary issue. So we ask people, hey, you asked, I answered, that conversation is done. If the person says, why can't we talk about it? Because I made a decision and I'm asking you to respect that decision. Maybe they will and maybe they won't, but there are words like those that you can use to be really clear about where you are. And that woman, Bev, never was in, so far that I know her, never was in another relationship with someone who was a boundary bully in that way. It's disrespectful. If you say, and I'm not saying that you can't, if you're in a long-term relationship, of course you have to talk about things. But once you've talked about it and you've come to your final decision, if that person continues to try to wear you down, that is definitely a boundary issue without a doubt. In the end, you have to be the boss of you. And yes, of course, I want you to be a boundary boss as well, but that's the truth, right? You have a right to be the decider of what happens in your life in all the areas where we draw boundaries, which are emotional, physical, sexual, psychological, material, spiritual, right? Mental, all of those areas. That's not for someone else to tell you that you shouldn't feel that way, quote unquote, right? What do you mean? First of all, I already do. I never got it when someone's like, well, you shouldn't feel that way. You're like, hi, it looks like the horse has already left the barn because I already do feel that way because I just told you I did. Stop judging me, please. But again, with boundary first timers, which is what I teach in the book and what I talk about, it's our job to inform them of where they're stepping over. It's our job to prioritize our own preference, to ask for what we want with words, right? Not passively, aggressively acting things out with actions, with actual words. Then, if people don't respect them, and listen, you also may have to remind someone, especially in a long-term relationship, it isn't like making a boundary request is miraculous. It's not. You will most likely, the same way when we teach kids to say please and thank you, right? We don't teach them once and think that if they don't say it the next time that they're disrespecting you. Do you think that? Of course not. Every time and all the time. And I feel like with boundaries, when you're starting this process, and especially with difficult people, be aware that you will need to re-establish that boundary probably. But it shouldn't have to be forever that you're reestablishing it. Expect that you will need to say it more than once. Don't expect that you will keep saying the same thing forever. So you've got to sort of find that balance yourself. But you really don't know until you start verbalizing your boundary requests. And the more you do it, the easier it gets. In the book, I have an entire chapter that is just scripts for you for every single solitary scenario you could possibly ever find yourself in where you would need to draw a boundary. And again, all of those things you can make your own, right? You don't have to say exactly the words I wrote, but I did a lot of sentence starters for you to make it easier. I'd like to make a simple request because that is a gentle way to start a boundary request conversation. So you also have the right, when you're dealing with difficult people in particular, to end a conversation, right? You don't want it to go off the rails. So it's like, you have a right to say time out. You want to take a break because it's your right to protect yourself from an interaction that you think is going to be damaging. So if it starts to get too heated, I feel like in any relationship, each person has to have the right to say, hey, I don't think this is productive right now. It's getting a little hot. Why don't we take a break, come back later tonight or tomorrow, you can make a plan, and we'll revisit this when we're cooler because I really don't want to fight with you. I love you. It's not you and me against each other. Let's think of it as you and me against the problem. And I know that we can figure it out or whatever. I mean, we can be productive and positive with our words because we don't want to be provocative with difficult people or regular people, right? That's not what being a boundary boss. There's no need to be provocative when you're a boss. You just talk true. It just starts to become your nature. It becomes second nature the more that you do it. And another thought that you may have with people who are really difficult, you have to determine, is someone just a difficult personality or are they really toxic? Do they fall more into the boundary destroyer category than they do the boundary bully? And when you read the book, you'll see that there's a real difference. But boundary destroyers, they're people that sometimes you need to really rethink and say, I don't know, is this relationship doing more damage to me? Is it a safe relationship to be in? But more about that in another episode. I hope that this episode and the information here added value to your life. And I want you to join my 5-day boundary unchallenge because, God, life is challenging enough. Who the hell needs another challenge? I don't think I do. Where I am answering your top 5 boundary questions. Right? So this is an intensive way for you to raise your awareness about how you do or don't communicate in all areas of your life, right? Because this is the foundation for healthy boundaries, is effective communication. So we want this so that you can build the real skill set, the boundary skill set that will help you express your authentic desires, wants, needs, and deal breakers in all of your relationships. So I want to say thank you for joining me today. If you like this episode, share it with your people. Please go join my 5-day Boundary Unchallenge. I can't wait to see you there. Super excited for Boundary Boss. Drop it on the 20th. Yay. Thank you. And as always, take care of you.